Hi, I just wanted to do a little video to explain the graphs in this post because I know that graphs, while some people love them, some people turn off. So I thought, what about a verbal explainer to go for those people who maths wasn't their favorite subject? Because I loved pharmacokinetics at uni. This is one of my favorite things, but I know a lot of my colleagues hate it. And really, it's just a technical term about how your body handles drugs. So the graph we're going to work through is showing on the y-axis is the amount of drug that's in the body, and the x-axis is the time in hours. So for a drug like caffeine, the effect in your body is actually proportional to the amount of drug that's in the body. And you need to reach a certain amount to get the desired effects, like increase mental alertness and enhance performance. And if that amount of caffeine in your body is below the green line, it's not going to be enough to produce those effects. But unfortunately, you still need to care about it because it might be enough to produce an adverse effect, like making you go to the toilet all the time. So we're going to call this part of the graph below the green line the useless zone, just to drive home the point that if you're going to use a drug, you need to use it at an appropriate dose to cause the desired effect. Otherwise, you're just paying for it and having potential adverse effects. Now, high amounts of caffeine can result in what we call dose-related adverse effects. And it's better to avoid getting to like this sort of amount in the body because this is where toxicity happens. And we're going to call this the toxicity zone. None of these are technical terms. And this is where things like the jitters and high heart rate and anxiety occur. Now, if you keep pushing the dose higher, you can actually get into what I'm calling the danger zone, which, surprise, surprise, is dangerous, where you get an excess amount of drug in your body. And when you get to really high amounts of drug in the body, it can result in effects in the body that don't occur at those usual pharmacological doses. And this can be lethal. And even for a drug like caffeine, if you take something like 2 to 3 grams a day, which can be achieved with those really high concentration caffeine powders, it can be lethal. So our mission should always be to keep well out of that danger zone entirely for all drug use, because no one should die because of the drugs they take. Now, when we're using a drug for therapeutic purposes, we're aiming to achieve an amount that's between the desired effects and toxic effects. And we're going to call this the Goldilocks zone, in that it's just right, and it's represented by this area shaded green. And when we use a drug for therapeutic purposes, we're trying to keep the amount of drug in our body within that zone for an amount of time that's fit for purpose. So for caffeine, we're not going to want the amount of caffeine in our body to be in this green zone 24 hours a day. By the time I go to bed, I want it to be way below that green line and into the useless zone so that I can have a good night's sleep. Now, we're going to have a look at what happens when we take a dose of caffeine in the form of a cup of coffee, like on an empty stomach. So when you do that, this line is going to represent the amount of caffeine in our body, and it starts moving into the bloodstream within a few minutes, and it's fully absorbed within about an hour. And this is what we call the peak amount of drug in the body. So from this point on, the amount of drug starts to reduce as caffeine gets eliminated by your body by the liver and the kidneys. And the caffeine keeps getting eliminated until it reaches a minimum amount, which we call the trough. Hopefully for most drugs, that could be getting down to 0. For some drugs, though, you do hold on to a little bit of it over time. And the time that the amount of drug stays above that desired effect line in that Goldilocks zone is what is the duration of action. So this is the overall picture of the amount of caffeine that occurs in the body over time, the peak, the trough, the duration of action, and that overall picture impacts how the drug makes us feel. So now that we've got that covered, we're going to work through a couple of ways that we can tweak the dose, the formulation, and the route of administration to change this. So one option you might go for is to increase the dose. So have a double shot of espresso instead of standard one. If you do this, it's going to increase the peak, but it's going to be absorbed at the same rate as it was normally. And this higher peak, it might be okay, but it does run the risk of pushing the dose, pushing the amount of drug into levels that produce those dose-related side effects. And similarly, you could decrease the dose, which would decrease the peak, but then you're going to risk that you're not going to have, you're going to get into that useless zone. You're going to stay in the useless zone. It's going to be a waste of time. Now, another option you might do is to take something to slow down the absorption so that the drug moves into the bloodstream more gradually. So maybe you're going to have your coffee after a full heavy meal, or you're going to switch over to the same dose, but you're going to take slow release capsules. And what this is going to do is it's going to slow down that absorption, so it flattens out the curve to a lower peak, but it's still going to get cleared at the same rate. So this does what we, so if the higher peak is relating to dose-related side effects, then a slower release product can help to reduce some of those dose-related side effects, and it can also extend the duration of action, which is, for medicine, it can be really useful to take something less often. So the other thing we can do is we can take a medicine by a different route, or we can take caffeine by a different route of administration to speed up the absorption and move it into the bloodstream faster. So I'm not going to advocate for caffeine by intravenous methods unless you're in a hospital and the doctor is prescribing it to you, but maybe having one of those sublingual melts, or even though I think it's ridiculous, this is where if you snorted the caffeine powder as an appropriate dose, this is what sort of dose response curve you're going to see then. So if it's the same dose as your usual cup of coffee, you're still going to achieve that same peak, but what you're going to do is you're going to get there faster. But the way you get rid of it will still stay the same. So you're just moving everything a little bit faster. Now, to end the video, I just want to close by explaining the concept of half-life. And this is the length of time that it takes for the amount of drug in your body to reduce by half. So with caffeine, the usual half-life is around 4 to 5 hours. And the general rule of thumb with any drug is that you consider it to be fully eliminated after around 5 half-lives. So for caffeine, that means it should be as good as gone in around about a day. Now, of course, there's some things that can speed this up or slow it down. And one of those things is drug interactions. Now, as I talked about in part 5 of this series, cigarette smoking means you clear caffeine out of your system faster. And so this reduces the half-life. But other things can make it longer, and these are probably more concerning. So things like liver or kidney damage. And the problem with these is that a longer half-life increases duration of action. So if we look at this on the curve, if you've got, with caffeine, it would be more of a problem if you've got liver impairment, but for other drugs, if you're that are more cleared by the kidneys, then your kidney function is going to matter. But you can see that this extends the half-life quite a bit. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the duration of action and your overall exposure to a drug, it's going to be much more. And so this can be a real problem in terms of side effects, particularly. So the key take-home message for this is that if you do have any problems with your liver or kidney function, it's really important to check with your doctor or your pharmacist to make sure anything that you take, any substances, whether they're prescribed, otherwise, or herbal products, to make sure that they're safe for you. So there you go, Pharmacokinetics 101.